We're good again? Well, hello, everybody, again. As we mentioned earlier, we're having technical issues. Ever so often we run into those, and so hopefully we're back up, and you guys are able to see us and participate. I think we were on, then we lost signal, and now we're back again. I think that's what's going on. So welcome back, everyone. And so rather than have Dr. Rick go through what he did again, we will...
we'll just say it was good.
It was good. It was good. So it seems like we're still having difficulties. If we are not able to get these difficulties resolved, then we will basically just have to record and then upload later. So
it still froze? Oh, we're on.
All right. If you're watching, please let us know that you can see us, because we seem to be having some ongoing difficulties, and we apologize for that. Hopefully we'll get this going, and we'll be good to go here. So, I have been thinking about a lot of things over the course of the last several days. I've had a lot that I've been praying about and talking to the Lord about, Dr. Rick. And one of those things is we on Thursday night, we do what we call Discipleship Thursday. And there are so many things that are a matter of discipleship. And, it'd be interesting to do a survey, like, if you could survey across the board, how many believers out there, what percentage of believers at some point in their Christian development and their life as believers actually went through any kind of, and I don't want to use the word structured, but for lack of a better word, structured, formal type of, intentional, I should say, discipleship, where they were kind of learning some of the fundamental things and adopting some of these fundamental principles. I would be real interested to know, what percentage of believers out there have gone through discipleship, because there's so many things that are a part of that discipleship process that without them, the life of the believer is going to be incomplete. It's going to be unfurnished, and they're going to be void of some things that they really need. What are your thoughts about that as it relates to, as it relates to what true discipleship is, and are we seeing this true discipleship? Does it really exist globally, do you think? And what are the dangers of not having strong, intentional discipleship gathering?
Well, I think what used to be called discipleship, or sometimes we called it the Roman road, it was like a little track. But discipleship basically was how to tell people about Jesus, how to lead people to the Lord. I know back in the day, discipleship was more about how to be a better church person and how to be a better witness of the Lord when you go out there. And sometimes it even included scripts. But very little, if any, that I can remember, discipleship, because we called it Sunday school. The Sunday school, I often thought it was kind of funny. We don't learn about Sundays, but it was called Sunday school. You remember that. Mm-hmm. And, that was probably about the most discipleship or teaching we got. But it was always about how to tell people about Jesus and very little about developing character and understanding who we are.
Yeah, so there's life experience involved in that. I mean, when he called his disciples, the 12 disciples, when he called them, what we see here is we see that there is this interactive type of this relational engaging of life lessons and instructions given and corrections to their presuppositions. Jesus would actually correct their formal way of thinking. He was molding them in this process of repentance, changing their mindsets.
Yeah.
He was always confronting their little expressions of faith, and he was always, speaking and really, I think, trying to call them up to a higher way of understanding and everything that he did there, even in the demonstration of his miracles and all the questions that they had that could be answered. So there was this personal calling away to where they actually became his students.
Yeah.
And he was able to inform them, inspire them, and he was also there to correct them and to kind of shape and mold their minds.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that was really not for the present. It was for what their assignment was going to be once he ascended.
Exactly.
And so I think that, to me, I think this is what we're really missing. Because to me, the purpose of discipleship is to ignite the growth patterns in believers, these young believers, and really provoke them to become students.
Yeah.
And I've said many times that the Bible is really it's not written for us to read, it's written for us to study. And furthermore, we should all learn how to be students.
Yeah.
And not just students in the sense of sitting in a classroom, but being able to take the life experiences we have with God, watching him prove faithful over and over and over again. Let those observations be added to the building blocks of our life in terms of, okay, this is constructing my ideology, it's constructing my theology, it's constructing my faith, and it's allowing me to actually, over a period of years, formulate belief systems that are rooted in maturity, the experience and the wisdom that comes with it, so that down the road, as we've done this over a long period of time, our lives begin to reflect that we've grown in God, we've learned of him, and that we also have developed what a real life of faith is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would suppose that the disciples probably would consider them, before he called them, as people of Israel. I would presume that they would have thought that they believed in God, that they had faith. Being with him, I think, revealed just how little faith they actually lived out of.
Yeah.
Do you think that's still an issue today? That maybe we presume to have more faith than we actually are living out of?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's because of so many decades of, engineering, if you can say it that way, through religious tradition that basically emphasized, try not to sin this week, try to stay saved, try to, ask God forgiveness, and kept a dependency. It was developing a dependency of people. It would be like, you mentioned the word student, because that goes with disciple. It would be like keeping someone in the first grade or even kindergarten and saying, now, just come back next week and we'll let you play with the blocks some more. And again, I know it's not that way everywhere. I don't mean to put everybody down, but what I'm saying is that's where we were for a long time. That's what people got and called it discipleship. It's basically, it wasn't trying to grow. It was trying to manage people's lives. I'm trying to manage getting through this life. I'm trying to manage, trying to make the right choices and be a moral person, instead of really challenging the growth process. Now it's time to go into the next grade.
Yeah, we need to graduate for sure onto the next things. I think certainly what Hebrews talks about is moving on from the elementary principles of the doctrines of faith. Let us go on unto perfection, completeness, wholeness. I certainly think that is something that needs to happen. My concern about the lack of true discipleship is that we're not fundamentally establishing people in faith. That, Lady Jo and I were talking about this on the way here this morning, that most people, they misunderstand acts of faith for moments of inspiration. So they go into a service and they're inspired by what's happening, whether it be the music, the praise and worship, whether it be the preaching, something is compelling them, inspiring them. And oftentimes they make decisions. They could be to go to the altar. It could be to pray for someone. It could be in giving, right? Financial giving. And they may mistake that as being an expression of their faith, but faith actually has more to do with a considered commitment, a choice, a decision that's made. It's attached to a strong, deeply rooted belief in God.
Yeah.
So when you come out of the ether of the moment, and all this doubt begins to try to prevail over your thinking concerning the thing you did in that inspired moment, you probably did something out of inspiration, not out of true, dedicated, determined, devoted belief, because that faith decision, it remains intact and stable and steady when it's being tested.
Yeah.
Right?
We used to call it the parking lot blues, because we get all inspired in the service, and by the time we hit the parking lot, where'd it go?
Yeah, and I think this speaks to the I think some of the what I would call the I don't know if I'd call it the methodology, but the way things are certainly established and structured as it relates to ministry. You know, you go in and you have, you know, revival services or whatever it is, and while you're there, you're inspired in the activity of giving, and usually there's a call for higher amounts of money. And so you sow these things, you give these things. And then you come out of it and there's deep, deep, deep regret for it.
Yeah.
Which means that you don't really think that there was a matter of obedience, but you realize you might have got caught up in the moment.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that creates a negativity regarding true faith-filled obedience to God in moments when it's legitimate.
Yeah. That's so good point.
You know, and so what happens is a negative experience, the after effect, the emotional after effect of something like that. And this is why I think that one of the things that I think the Lord has actually brought us to, moving us away from revival settings, because I think sometimes revival settings are more inspirational than they are actually faith established. Built upon a real belief in God, a true devotion that is daily with God, as opposed to going into places where we have inspired moments where we're moved by the oration of Scripture. We're moved by and there's nothing, I'm not saying there's something wrong with being moved by Scripture when it's preached. But we do need to distinguish between what is real dedicated obedience, a heart that is determined to say, God, I'm doing this because I believe this is what you have said. I believe that, and so we attach belief to it. We attach faith to it. We're persuaded not about what's happening in the moment, but we're persuaded by the fact this is truly what the Lord has ordered for my life. And I think that has kind of been a real super sensational alternative to the real dedicated, devout living day by day by day by day.
You know, in counseling ministers over the years, I've found that some of them who had some kind of fall, if we could put it that way, or they went outside of what they should in their calling, one way or another, one extreme or the other, that I can almost pinpoint when they were talking to me when it happened. It's not, and of course it didn't just happen, but I mean when the culmination of it happened. And it was usually after a success, and usually after a victory, or usually after even, and I'll say it, after a revival. Because we tend to think of those things as accomplishments. And then we say, wow. Like you say, the rush, the, culmination of all this. Wow, we accomplished this. Look at what happened. And then we lay back. And because, like you say, it's not an ongoing process of growth. It's an accomplishment. We did it, And that's the most dangerous thing to think, because what happens is then you relax your standard or whatever. You just say, wow, now it's kind of like you go on a mental vacation. And that's where the enemy can begin to weave whatever he does to cause there to be, a fall, for lack of a better word.
One of the principal things that I've learned is relative to God, quote unquote, showing up. We have this terminology about, God just showed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I understand that. But if we were to look historically, if we were to draw out the references in Scripture, what I come away with is that God usually shows up in the counter to what we think God,
right.
where he shows up.
Yeah.
How many did we throw in the fire? Well, we threw in 3. Well, there's a 4th that looks like the Son of God. He showed up in their persecution.
Yeah.
He showed up in their trial. He showed up in their hard time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we were to look at all of these references about how God chooses to reveal himself, on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John, he takes them up. Peter wanted to memorialize the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The glory of the Lord shows up. There's Moses, there's Elijah, there's Jesus in this glorified state. The moment that Peter began to want to memorialize it,
yeah,
the atmosphere shifted, and the only one left there was Christ.
Yeah.
So as to say, it's about him. He's the king.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like the moment that he began to want to memorialize it with building houses and tents,
yeah,
all of a sudden it drained the glory away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there became this kind of sobering moment.
Yeah.
Where now correction was actually being given.
Yeah.
In the sense that the atmosphere shifted, a voice comes from heaven, and it was an instructive, informative voice that says, "This is my son, hear ye him."
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that oftentimes we picture these moves of God to be ultra inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
To basically be these chill bump moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we equate that with what we would call the presence of the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although we live day to day, being the temple of the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
the infilling of his Spirit dwelling in us, completely oblivious to the internal presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
But in our chill bump moments, we categorize that as life altering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Completely blind and oblivious to the fact that that presence of God could not be more real than it is internally in us.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think there's a disconnect there. So discipleship to me is what begins to highlight the realities of such things as God showing up in our hard moments.
Yeah.
Revealing himself as the 4th one in the fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
As the voice of correction that says, "Get thee behind me, Satan," right after someone has a great revelation about who Christ is.
Yeah.
About being able to govern and regulate and help us understand that the internal presence of God has greater significance than the external substantial presence we feel in a service. This is where discipleship, I think, has its greatest value, is to bring us out of the ether
Yeah.
and to bring us into the realistic understanding of what God has literally, legitimately done to establish us in principal foundational things. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are in this, because it seems to me that because, and don't get me wrong, I love the goosebump moments.
Oh, sure.
I think we all appreciate them, but I think we've placed a higher value on those experiences
Yeah.
than we do the fact that God has chosen to take up habitation with us
Oh,
internally.
Yeah.
And that the presence of God that lives in us has greater significance than the presence of God we feel in moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say that not to take away that, what we call the presence, which I'm not sure that's what it is. I'm not sure that it's the presence of God. I think that we say it, but of late, I've been considering this. Is that really what I'm feeling? Am I really feeling the presence of God? And why is it that I'm not, quote unquote, feeling it every day? Because it's with me every day.
Yeah.
And somebody said, well, it's the manifested presence of God. Well, and that very well could be a component of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's something that once it reaches to the emotion in men, once it reaches the place where we feel,
Yeah.
it seems to have greater value. Well, that's not faith.
Yeah. That's not faith.
If it has to get to the emotional place in order for us to believe it, that's not faith, because faith actually is a belief without
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Faith is an ideological thing. It is a persuasion thing based upon what we know.
Yeah.
And the principles are where we attach our faith.
Yeah.
By the principles. It's our faith is in God. So I think that the absence of discipleship, I think it is deteriorating, and it's eroding away the fundamentals that we need to actually be rooted and grounded and cemented in,
Yeah.
that stabilize us in hard times.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have and I'm not talking about discipleship that promotes the idea of, do not sin, live holy.
Right.
And I'm not talking about, the catechisms. I'm talking about truly getting to know the nature of
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
and learning how to dissect the scripture in order to look at it from beneath the surface, to identify the heart of God in it and how he's revealing himself, and to understand his ways. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you just
I know I said a whole lot.
Well, you just said something very key. All of it was, but especially what you just said, what he's doing underneath. That is key, because faith is an inside job. Some of the church world, for a period of time, made it kind of an outside to come in, when God always works from the inside out. And what I'm saying is that if you really want, and like you said, it's acknowledging his presence. His presence is always there. But how do I acknowledge it? I don't acknowledge it by seeing something that moved me emotionally, or by, wow, look at this person, got healed, and wow. I heard somebody say, you need to see people get healed to build your faith. That doesn't build your faith. That builds your sight.
Mm-hmm.
Faith is when you believe it even when you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think when we begin to realize that, I'm going to say, I don't know if I should put a percentage on it, but 90% of what God does is underground. And 90% of what we acknowledge is underground in us. It's, somebody said, well, patience is waiting. No, patience is the work he's doing while you're waiting. So when we realize that, he said, if you had faith as a mustard seed, that's an underground work. If you would allow the seed to die, put down roots, become the life that begins to develop, and realize I'm working most of my work on the inside of you. And then, first the blade, then the ear. Then you manifest based on a walk and a lifestyle, rather than just, I just saw something that inspired me from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you're saying, right? It's beneath.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like this. The only thing God ever does in any of our lives is work beneath the surface, so to speak. That's what a planter does.
Yeah.
God is invested in the seed. God has confidence that the seed will produce what it's intended to. So God has a different approach to things.
Yeah.
As far as we are concerned, and I'm gonna read some of this. It's funny to me, actually. Matthew 17, where he takes them up there, and it's funny because Peter, James, and John, it says Jesus took them up there with him to where he was going to be transfigured. And then in verse 4 is really hilarious to me, because in verse 4, Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here." Like he is informing Jesus. Like Jesus just kind of haphazardly went and chose them to go up there.
Right. Yeah.
Like he's not the sovereign king. Like, you probably don't know this, Jesus, but it's really good for us to be here.
Yeah.
And then he says, "So if you will, let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." This is what he's saying. I mean, it's funny because he's educating Jesus on the fact that it's good, as though he was completely oblivious to the fact Jesus knew it was good for you to be there. That's why he chose you to come up there.
Yeah.
So if we're where we are, it's probably good for us to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right? If he's the one that brought us there, it's good for us to be there.
Yeah.
We don't need to go, "This is good for me to be here."
Yeah.
But what really gets me is the second part of what he said to him. Let us make 3 tabernacles. Well, I'm beginning to wonder if it was really good for you to be here, Peter. And while he yet spake, I love this. While he was telling Jesus how good it was for them to be there, and he was giving Jesus the plan. We're going to build 3 tabernacles for each of you. While he was doing that, a bright cloud overshadowed them. Behold, a voice out of the clouds which said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." God did not even let Peter finish what he was saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
God interrupted him.
Yeah.
You ever had those moments where
yeah.
God has to come and interrupt you?
Yeah.
Because what you're saying really is like so way out there. It makes no sense. So here God comes and he interrupts him. And he says, "This is my beloved Son." Now there were 3 people standing there, but God wanted the attention on Jesus. "In whom I'm well pleased. Hear ye him." And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and they were sore afraid. Well, I thought it was good for you to be there. It was good for you to be there until God said something that disrupted your plan.
Yeah. 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 That's
Right?
it.
I mean, this is glorious. It's wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
And this is why I think revival has its problems. Because right in the middle of it's good for us to be here. And all of a sudden out of that comes all these ideas that we have.
Yeah.
They originate from us. And so what do we want to do? We want to memorialize the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And God comes and says, "No, that's not what I want you to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
All I want you to do is hear what he's saying." So apparently what you're seeing, it has at least the potential to prevent you from hearing what he's saying.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Your experience has the ability to keep you deaf to the things he wants to tell you. And that's a problem for God, because God interrupted him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if this makes sense, but it's amazing to me how they saw Moses and Elijah. 2 dead people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were not afraid. But when God spoke
Yeah.
and told them what he told them, they got afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm sure that the magnitude and the dynamic of God's voice coming out of the cloud probably shook them to their core. But I think I might be a little bit uneasy seeing two dead people.
Yeah.
But yet when God speaks, that's what really got them all worked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my thing about all this is, to me, this is a really good illustrative picture of what these kind of tabernacle to memorialize that. We want the memory of this thing to be echoed and reverberated, because this is special.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, my son,
Yeah.
hear ye him.
Yeah.
I think it's been detrimental to the church.
Oh, yeah. You know, I think really in some ways you could say what event, they would call it the event, was really they were becoming the first denomination in a way. Because what denominations tend to do is get stuck. Okay, we've got it all now. We've got the whole counsel of God. I think one of the big reasons why, and it's obvious that this discipleship is needed, is because without it, we're open to our own interpretation of an event. Because then without any kind of understanding of how it is a process that God has been working, you know, to bring us to this point and where the point is beyond that, if we're not brought into a maturity through discipleship, true discipleship that says, you know, I realize this may be great, but I could be left to my own interpretation, and that's not healthy. What I need now is some equipping and understanding that this is part of a tapestry. This is something that's launching us forward, and I need to understand it better. And I think a lot of times revivals, and there's been good ones, but I mean, there's been a tendency to look at the billboard and worship it instead of what it's saying. It's a sign, but we're looking at the billboard and making an event and an accomplishment where really it was trying to show us a prophetic word to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, you know, let's read verse 8 and then we'll read verse 9. It speaks to that very thing. And when he had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man except Jesus. Everything's gone but him. And I love this next one, verse 9. He knew their tendency. He knew what their tendency was going to be.
Yeah.
The same as our tendency. And as they came down from the mountain, he charged them. He didn't just say, give them a suggestion. He's like, hey, look, if I were you guys, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't tell anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, he said, do not tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. In other words, I don't want this to be the motivating factor for why people come to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want your experience, and we do this revival, this conference, this whatever, and don't do that. You know, he would do miracles. So don't tell anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet we're building our ministries upon a pile of crutches, wheelchairs, and, you know, walkers in the corner. And the thing is that I just feel in my spirit that these things have troubled me from, I mean, many years they've troubled me.
Yeah.
Because there's only one thing, in my opinion, Dr. Rick, that those things actually are a platform or a foundation for, and that's to monetize the miracle.
Yeah.
To monetize the experience.
Yeah.
And I personally think that he wants a love relationship. He wants it to be that the heart is connecting to him. Otherwise, he's nothing more than a vending machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And the Lord told me years ago, he gave me a vision of a church, this church building, and it was shaped in the form, it had a steeple on the preference list checked off because it got this and this and this and this and this. It's a place that we're called out to. We're called out of our homes, right? We're called out of our homes, right? We're called out of our personal dwellings into a corporate body.
Yeah.
That's why the word means the called out ones. It means to be called out from our personal places. This even has its roots back and going back to the Feast of Tabernacles. They left their homes. They came to a corporate place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was a place of celebration. And so in the New Testament, I'm going to build my church. And where did they legislate? Where did this ecclesia, where did it exist? It functioned at the gates.
Yeah.
People left their homes. They were called out of their personal individual dwelling place into a corporate place where legislative governmental things were taking place to equip, to ultimately influence the city.
Yeah.
To influence what was on the other side of that gate. And what is the purpose of the church? To influence what's on the other side of that gate, which is the gates of hell.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to build this thing and the gates of hell will not prevail. What he was saying is that what's happening in darkness will be destroyed by the light of this ecclesia. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of it. Not to run from the devil, but to actually position ourselves where darkness prevails. And this is what God spoke to me when I came here. There's 1,000 churches here in Port St. Lucie. Well, God, what'd you send me here to start another church for? I want you to be an ecclesia. I want you to be a governmental place, a governmental voice. I want you to preach the kingdom, and I want this to be a place that shines its light into the religious dark places where men have been captured by religious ideology, and they've been ensnared by the burdens of works mentality, poverty mentality, and all these religious ideas that keep men captive. Mm-hmm. I want you to preach liberty. And so that's what we're doing here.
And I can attest to that for sure. You know, I think we've been more interested in performance than representation. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I can hear it over and over again through the years, coming through several different things. I would often hear, we need results. We got to have results. You know, we need to see growth. We need to see, all those kind of things. We've got to see performance. And again, there's nothing wrong with performance and results. But to me, I have to tell you, in my own life, some of my greatest growth and character building has been in the hard times. Mm-hmm. It's been in the times where it looked like I was put on the shelf and God said, no, you're in an incubator. Mm-hmm. And we somehow have not shamed it. You know, we've almost like, no, that when nobody wants to see that. I actually had somebody tell me when I was hosting TBN once, a guest said, you know, I don't even talk to anybody who hasn't had solid victory all their life. I'm like, well, you know, talk to me. You know, it's me in the working, but there's been times I failed.
I guess the question should have been, well, when's the last time you talked to Jesus?
Right. Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, obviously he gained the ultimate victory, but he went through some stuff.
Yeah. But we have been so long in some of the church world of preaching performance and results. You know, we got to see results so people will know to come back. But, you know, it's like the results is keeping the people coming back rather than growing. Mm-hmm. Then there's something really wrong there. And that's where you'll find things go off the rails at some point.
Yeah, go off the rails. They do. You know, I guess one of the struggles, internal conflicts I have is that my desire is for there to be a real hunger for, I guess we'll use Coke's slogan, the real thing.
Yeah.
I mean, do we really believe today, in the times in which we live, do we really believe still that men and women of God are called by God? Marked by God, called by God, chosen out by God to do specific things? Or do we believe that ministry has simply become an occupational passion? I mean, is that really what we have grown to? Have we come to this place where we just believe that that's their occupational choice? which I'm not sure why anybody would do it, unless you're in mainline denominationalism where those guys get paid pretty good. I create in them great sobriety and great reverence,
Yes.
because they should understand that if God is saying to me at a young age that I am called into the ministry, then there is something that I'm going to have to go through, work through. Brokenness is that I'm going to have to endure in order to be qualified to stand in the graces that are necessary to love God's people unconditionally as we do what we're called to do.
Yeah.
Because God, He doesn't call you to beat His people up.
No. No.
And to let go of all of our religious ideas. What do I have to go through to surrender all those things that I believe are sacred?
Yeah.
You know, God called Gideon. And do you know what one of the first things was that He told Gideon to do? You got to tear down the altars of your forefathers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't worship the way you used to. You certainly can't worship what you used to.
Yeah.
And so He called him as a great man of valor to a specific purpose. But the first thing He started telling him is you got to change what you worship, change how you worship, change what you believe. You got to take the stuff that your daddy taught you and you got to surrender all that. I mean, think about it for a minute.
Yeah.
And here Gideon is like, well, you know, you've talking to the wrong person. And he's like, I'm talking to the right person, but you're only the right person because I see you on the other side of the altars of your dad.
Yeah.
The altars of your grandfather.
Yeah.
I see you there. You don't see yourself there yet because those altars still remain. I see you as being great, but you're not great worshiping the way they worship. You're not great